Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Silent Skills podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about childhood trauma and the everlasting effects that it has on children. My name is Shaharia Johnson. I'm the CEO and founder of Silent Skills, and I'm also here with Maria, who is an educator, and she also represents Brown Girl Interrupting. So I want to welcome her. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Shaharia. It's an honor to be here in this conversation with you and in the work that you do with Silent Skills.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to hear that. So the first thing I want to get into are adverse childhood experiences. Some people call them ACEs. And there are a lot of different experiences that a child can go through that affect them very negatively. So some of those ACEs are called like neglect, physical abuse, trauma, if that child's parents are on drugs or, addicted to any type of vice. We also have like medical conditions, poverty, a lot of things that can contribute to, how they'll turn out later on in life. The thing I want to focus on is trauma, abuse, social, emotional, and also physical abuse as a child. Do you have any experience with childhood trauma?
Interesting questions. I know the ACEs. Actually, I learned about it only just a few years ago as an educator, as you said, right? And it was more in terms of understanding the trauma that students bring to school. But recently, in the last few years, I think I've seen a lot of some of those things that you talked about with the emotional and the mental abuse that comes from childhood trauma, not for myself, but for my children. I was fortunate to have a pretty privileged life with my family. My parents were very loving and nurturing, but I married into a relationship that was emotionally abusive. In the last few years, as my children have become adults, I've watched how that has impacted their growth as men. And there's definitely like a lot of trauma that they're undoing. And it's a hard thing to watch as a parent, but it definitely impacts them.
Right. So I'm glad that you are aware of it. And you believe that they are aware of it too? You think that they recognize it? Like, have you had conversations with them about it?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I have 3 boys. They're 22, 20, and 17. And I have a daughter who's 6, but she doesn't really. I think it's a little different, right, when they're younger. So I would say 2 out of my 3 children, the older ones, have actually started to understand it and see it a little bit more. And the challenge is they do get it, but they kind of almost like are in this place of they're kind of angry at themselves or wondering like how did they allow themselves to be manipulated, to be controlled. Every day I hear my boys kind of share new things that they realize that they allowed into their lives or that they were impacted by. So 1 out of 2 is probably more vocal.
Okay.
And seeing more of it, but he's more of a talker anyways, because they're boys, so they're not super super talkative to begin with. But he's the one who definitely, he can say, he'll specifically say, I had to carry the emotional baggage of my parent.
Wow.
And I'm trying to understand why. Like, why did I have to do that? Why did he expect me to carry his issues? And then understanding how it impacts him now as an adult as he's growing.
And that's a 22-year-old.
That's my 20-year-old.
20-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is a lot to unpack. And he is still very young,
Yeah.
Sometimes these things are lifelong processes to really unpack. 20 is not too old, he's...
It's not, and I think many ways he's kind of like, he's at a young age to finally understand it. I think a lot of people don't realize until they're like their 40s or they've impacted a lot of people along the way. But I'll say a lot of that probably comes from having a really open conversation with my kids. Like I haven't hidden things. So you talked about me being Brown Girl Interrupting.
Right.
That's my blog that I write about. My blog started with trying to heal from that marriage, that mental and emotional control and manipulation and abuse, and And now I'm kind of seeing those things coming out for my kids.
Childhood trauma. I want to go into where does it come from? How do we get to a space of saying that child was probably traumatized? So I want to talk about that. So a lot of the topics, a lot of things that I would say is like parents neglecting their children. You also have parents who gaslight their children, make them seem like what they're saying isn't actually reality. So that comes with invalidating their feelings and also picking on a child, like bullying them. So if they're bigger than what you feel like they should be, not allowing them to eat certain things or calling them names. So those are some of the things of where childhood trauma comes from, and also actual physical abuse, like kids who are physically being abused, sexually being abused, and also watching their parents experience abuse. So like all of those things are ways that a child can be traumatized. So let's say if the mom is being abused or the dad is being abused, these are all things that can impact the child. And I heard you saying that they witness a lot of the abuse that you feel like, is now impacting them. And you have the little one too, so she may not even.
Luckily, the little one didn't witness as much. That was part of why I left. I had a daughter, and by the time she was a year, I kind of knew I didn't want her to see what my boys had seen. But yeah, they witnessed it, and I think the thing with abusers is that they don't pick and choose necessarily.
Right.
Whoever is in the home is going to be impacted by who they are, because it's who they are. It's what they do with people. It's how they treat people. And I would say that that's what's coming out for the trauma of my children as I'm watching, right? It's part of it is what they've seen happen to me. And I think they've understood what's happened to me more now because they see it and understand and can name it happening to themselves. But I think a lot of kids carry that. And then it leads into like decisions they're making in their own lives, right? So that trauma, like you said, is lifelong in every decision, in every relationship. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes kids imitate what they experienced as a child. That's where it begins getting normalized. So they feel like, oh, the people that I love, the people who have been protecting and providing for me have been acting this way towards each other or towards me, so it must be the way. It must be what's right, because they're going off of that example. And that's why I feel like a lot of times that's where the cycle begins for children. And so they grow up to get into teenage relationships, even adult relationships, feeling like, this is how I talk to a person if I want to get something out of them. You have to be aggressive or violent or manipulative because they saw that that's what worked with their parents.
And then on the other side of it, this is what I accept. I worry about that sometimes with my daughter and like her dynamics with men, and just thinking like, what will she accept? Because she's thought that, like you said, it's the normal thing, right? Because there's both ends of it, right? There's the impact of like people becoming abusers, and then the impact of accepting abuse and that cycle of going right back into abusive relationships.
And even overcompensating. But yeah, accepting abuse, so like people pleasing. Because what happened when your mom or dad would speak out or fight back or, engage with that toxic relationship. So they don't want to end up doing the same things. I feel like overcompensating is also a thing, so you want to be extra careful, extra nice, accept a lot of things like you were saying, be automatically submissive, even if you don't agree. So you don't be the one that's, lashed out on. Or you feel like you may not be loved if you don't automatically accept what's given to you. You may not feel like there's a better way to be loved.
Yeah, I think that's it, right? Like it's like you believe that in order to be loved, you have to let someone do whatever it is that makes them happy. And you believe that you have to perform and be someone in order to receive love. And it's so toxic. And I see a lot of it with girls more than boys, but I think it's everybody. Like it can be impacted by, men can do it too and feel that too, right?
Yeah.
So do you think like there's ways for kids to to move through that, like knowing, like if there were advice for parents, like of how to support their children, knowing that they've experienced that or that they've seen that in their lives, like have you seen ways where you can support your kids to not kind of go back in those patterns?
I think one way is like validating emotions. I think it begins with conversations and emotions. I think it begins with emotions. Like, how did you feel when you saw this happen? Or how do you feel when people argue with you or yell at you? How do you feel? And then letting them know that it's okay to feel those things and also not be okay with those things. So I think that would be that's a good way to talk about it and let them become aware of it. Just because it's happening don't mean that it's normal. Don't mean that it's good for you in a way to live. So I would say, start with conversations and recognizing emotions and reactions and the right way to react and engage with people, no matter what intense emotion you may be feeling. It's always a right and a wrong way.
I like that, and I think that's true. I think it's complex, though, because, like, when I think back to my own experiences, like, when I was married, what I could do for my kids to protect them was different than when I left. Because I had more freedom, and I felt I had more freedom to be totally honest with them about the things, whereas when I was married, I think, like, I was always like, how do I teach my boys how to navigate around this other person's personality of control and trying to make them feel bad about themselves, right? Like, it was like I was trying to teach my boys how to have a shield. And now what I see myself doing as an adult, like validating their emotions, is like I'm trying to give them tools to get through it versus just blocking it, because that's not healing.
Right.
But it's hard. I just think it's hard, and it's hard when you're in the dynamic as a parent, watching your kids also, because you're just trying to survive yourself.
Yep. You're trying to survive and also still protect them, but also not trigger your partner. So it's like it's a balancing act.
It is. It's like you're juggling everything at the same time. Which I think is important, right? Like for your audience to know that it's not that it's this one easy fix.
Right.
But validation of emotions and like talking about emotions is a really big step.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. I want to go into like actual abuse, like physical abuse. I know the conversation has come up with like people say that they're disciplining their child, but some people just see it as no, you're being too rough, or I feel like it's a thin line between discipline and abuse. Whether that's physical, verbal. I've seen some very harsh conversations and even like beatings that parents do to their child, and they call it discipline. But really, I feel like that's part of where abuse stems from as well. Like when they get older, realizing what was done to them. So how do you feel about discipline versus abuse?
So
how do you discipline?
So it's interesting, like, again, like I have 3 older boys and then a daughter on the end who's much younger, right? So, like, how I discipline my boys is very different than how I discipline my daughter. And I think I've learned because, so for me, it's this. What's the purpose? Like, what's the purpose, right? Am I trying to instill fear in my kid? And is it really working? Like, I think that was it. Like, I disciplined and I spanked my kids, and I was probably a little rougher maybe sometimes than I needed to be, just because, like we said, right, when I was in trauma and I was in a bad relationship, my brain was not always making the right decisions for the people around me because I was just trying to survive. But when I think about it, I'm like, well, I spanked them, and I might have taken a spoon to their butts. It wasn't my finest of hours, I think, as a parent. But the truth is, like, the behavior never changed.
Right.
So like, they never changed. So, like, what was the purpose of it? So, and I guess that's what I look at it with discipline. But I think that, like, it's really important to recognize, though, that, like, culturally and in terms of, like, society, discipline for some is a way to prepare them kind of for the harshness of the world. And so like there has to be a balance, because sometimes kids need that fear because they have to like really fear that like if I mess up, I actually have really big consequences.
Okay.
So I don't know. How do you feel about it? I mean, you have a little one, so like what do you see as discipline with your son?
Well, it's hard. Like I never believed in whippings. Like I never received any whippings as a child. Like I was a good child. Like I didn't do, typical like bad things that people would get beat for. But before I had my child, I was like I'm anti whippings. Like I don't feel like they help. My parents, they would talk with me. They would have conversations with me about the expectations. It was like I was more mature. It was like mature conversations. I feel like a lot of parents, out of anger, and I even have to catch myself sometimes, like out of anger, wanting to pop him or something like that, when he's not doing what I want him to do. But it's like sometimes he don't understand why he shouldn't do what he should be doing. Like he's only 3 years old right now, so I know he can't understand all of the things that I'm saying to him. But yeah, I don't whip him. I give him like pops sometimes, but I feel like when people want to whip their children, it comes from a place of anger. Like you're just trying to express how angry you feel instead of letting them know how disappointed you feel or why they're wrong. So I think that's where whippings stem from. Like the parents' anger, you're just like, be quiet. It's just your anger. It's not really about discipline. I don't feel like a whooping is a discipline. I don't feel like it's a discipline. I don't feel like it's teaching them the right thing to do. For me, discipline means teaching them control. I feel like that's kind of synonymous. Discipline is control over yourself, control in knowing right from wrong, having that inner understanding. This is right because this is wrong because this, and I should choose to do the right thing, and not because somebody's going to hit me if I don't. Yeah. But when kids are still very young, it could be hard. But as they get older, he'll start to understand better. But I also think he'll start to appreciate that I didn't whip him, because I feel like that also teaches them that when you get upset at other people, you should go and punch them if they're not, if they're not being friendly.
Right.
It's like teaching them that
it's
that's
okay
reaction.
Yeah.
If I'm angry, I can do this because my parents were angry at me and they did this, so I have a right. It's like you're having a right to somebody else's body, somebody else's person, when you feel like you can be angry and lash out because of what you're feeling or how they made you feel. It shouldn't be like, I'm going to put my hands on you because you made me feel this way. No, you should talk about it or leave the situation. This is bigger than just children, because even teenagers and even as adults, that's when you really want to
whip them. Let's be honest. Come on now, when they're teenagers, the little ones are cute. You can get over that easier.
Yeah. What was I about to say? Like even as adults, some parents feel like they have to put their child in their place. Like my son, I know he's going to be super tall. He's going to be taller than me. I'm not going to ever feel like, oh, you're talking to me like this, I got to beat you down to make you feel less than, it should be just like that respect that comes. But I feel like some parents have that mentality, like, I got to beat you down, show you who's boss, show you who's in control,
I think that's huge. Like I think what you're talking about is the idea of we need to, as adults, then control our kids. And it's a control that's from your ego, not a control of like helping them learn how to regulate themselves. And I've seen a difference. Like I've seen a difference in raising my sons and raising my daughters. Like my daughter has the tools so much that like when I remember it was actually literally I was in, so when you say big kids, my son was like, my relationship with my sons has been like a real roller coaster since my separation. And that's from, honestly, I think like it's trauma. It's trauma for me, trauma for my kids, and manipulation and control on the other end. But I think, so I was in a conversation with my son who was 18 at the time, and I had gotten really heated, and he's huge. He's much bigger than me. And he started to literally physically come at me, and I reacted back, right? Like I'm small, but I'm not timid and shy, right? So I reacted back. And the moment was this. It was that my daughter walked in the room and she's like, Mama, come with me. And she took me into her room and she said, just sit down. She's like, breathe. Just breathe. And she sat down and she started these yoga poses with me. And I was like, oh my God, you're so right. Like I was getting to a place that wasn't me. Like, and that's it, right? Like, I don't want to be that person. Like, what parent wants to be in that discipline mode and that angry mode and that controlling mode? It's so much nicer when you have relationships with your kids, when you know who they are, when you listen to them. And I really think, like, I could never imagine my boys doing that at that age because they didn't see that kind of mom from me. They didn't see that kind of discipline, but she has. So, yeah, I think that's huge, right? Like, the communication and knowing ourselves as adults is really big in how we parent our kids.
And also teaching them to know themselves. You know, like you can start from, you know, like a very early age, teaching them about the things that trigger them. Because at that age, they don't even know what triggers them. You know, I'm talking about like the early childhood students, kids, I'm thinking about teaching. But yeah, like the early childhood kids, like teaching them about triggers. Like, you know, if this person makes you want to be angry or want to fight them, maybe you should choose different friends that make you want to be nice, you know. So I think that's a big part of, I remember you asked me the question, how do you, when you see what they have been enduring, how do you stop it in its tracks, basically? How do you get them to start to think differently? And I think that's another good way, teaching them to know yourself, you know. When you get angry, what do? What should you be doing when you get angry? What are things that you could be doing, you know?
Even just like, can you tell when you get angry, right? Like, do you feel, I always talk to my daughter about, like, you see your fist balling up, right? That means you're angry. Like, let go of whatever it is, right? Like, first thing is just relax your body. But that's something that, like, we don't talk about. And adults do it and don't realize it, right? Like, your body knows you're angry and knows your emotions before your brain does. And when you're in tune with your body, and kids can be in tune with their bodies if we teach them to, right? That's huge.
Yeah, like my son, he's very calm. He's a very happy baby. You know, very goofy, laughs at a lot of things. But when he gets frustrated, he like have these like outbursts. So like when he was trying to take off his coat, you know, like if the zipper gets stuck at the bottom, he'd be like, and then like try to rip it off. And or if it's like a toy, because he likes to like engineer, build things. So like if he's trying to build blocks and it just keep falling when he about to put the last one on, he'll get super angry, knock it all down. And in those moments, I stop him. I'm like, Kari, relax. It's okay. Like so I'm trying to start now, so it won't turn into something else when he gets older. Like I have to tell him, like, Kari, it's okay. And a lot of times I help him. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not. You know, but I help him a lot. You know, like if something's special, I say, here, let mommy help you. And I do it with him, you know, or do it the right way. I think it's a good thing. Some people feel like it could be spoiling him, but I always take the step to help him when he's getting super frustrated. You know, some people have the mentality, let him, he's never going to learn how to do it himself if you don't let him do it by himself. I'm like, but this is frustrating. He should know that I'm there to support him and help him through. I know I'm not going to always be there when he's having frustrated moments, but I think it shows him that, you know, it's people that can help you when you're feeling frustrated. You don't have to knock all the blocks down because then you won't have any blocks to build up, you know.
Yeah,
Take your time.
That's true.
You can ask mommy for help. So that's one of the ways I work with him because he gets very frustrated when things are not working out in the way that he wants them to.
And I think, like, going back to our conversation on the abuse thing, or like just thinking about what traumatizes kids, neglect, emotional like distancing sometimes does that, right? Like, so when kids feel they're supported, even in small things like building the blocks, right? Or like, you know, like I'm not going to be allowed to stay frustrated. I think that's huge in giving them validation and affirming like their needs and making them feel nurtured and loved, which I think for so many adults, part of their healing is that they were missing that at some point in their lives. And
I agree.
And then they repeat the cycles.
I definitely agree with that. So I just want to move on to how it shows up in adulthood. When children are traumatized at that young age, how does it show up? I know some of the things that show up in adults are like low self-esteem, identity issues, being attracted to narcissistic people, feeling like you have to people please and be submissive. There are a lot of ways that it shows up. Not being honest with yourself, feeling like you have to lie, to get people to like you, or, to not push people away. You feeling like you have to just go with the flow. And also aggression. That's another way that I feel like, you're just naturally more aggressive because that's what you know.
And you're triggered, right? You're triggered, and that's what you think is how you deal with things, right? Yeah. So, like in that, the work that you do with Silence Kills is you work with a lot of domestic abuse survivors, and have you seen those cycles come out in their own experiences of what they experience in their childhood, in how they've reacted in their adulthood to experience things?
Yeah, I've seen it show itself in a lot of different ways, actually. Like, I know people who have been abused as children, whether that was, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and I see how they're like, overly, like overcompensating, being, going above and beyond to prove that they're not a certain way. Like, so I know some like sexual abuse survivors, and so they feel like they have to be super masculine, super aggressive. But I feel like it's a defense mechanism because of what how you were violated as a child. So now you're super aggressive because you refuse to feel like anybody is putting you in a position of submission or weakness. So that's one way that I see it showing up. But then I also see people who are very like shy and timid because of what they've been through, people pleasers, just going with the flow. Then I also see people who have turned into abusers because of what they witnessed as a child, feeling like it's okay to have fights with your boyfriend. That's the noble thing to do, to be arguing, going back and forth. He hit you, you hit him back. So I've seen it show up in those ways.
It's a dangerous cycle on both ends, though, right? Mm-hmm. Either accepting it and being, or being like hypersensitive to everything around you, or then doing it to others is like, that's a huge impact on adulthood. Do you see that like in happening younger? Like I was thinking that adolescence is almost like, we were talking about adulthood, but adulthood kind of starts almost like in adolescence with dynamics of relationships. Like some of those things start to come out for kids.
Right. I definitely agree with like teenage years, right? Like
yeah.
13 to 18.
Is that, I don't know. I think teenagers seem to start at 11 these days. I don't know, depending on the teenagers.
What, 11 or 12, yeah.
Yeah. But those dynamics, right? Like it's fascinating. Like I'm in education, but some of the stuff that I do is working with like having dialogue and conversations on experiences with kids that are middle school and high school, and the number of girls, it just tends to be girls that speak about it, but the number of girls who have talked about being in toxic relationships with guys at young ages, it's just like it hurts you because you're like, God, why do you accept, like, why would you think that's okay to accept that, to be in that? But that's the culture of relationships right now, even at like adolescence.
My love, why has your beautiful complexion changed to bruises, blood and cuts? Why are your eyes swole to a shut? Who changed you to this unrecognizable person, beaten beyond recognition? You told me everything was great, showed me the picture-perfect love, but it was a picture with no behind the scenes. I see. You put concealer over those bruises, and that's why you've been wearing long sleeves. I see. Why didn't you see? The signs colored bright, red flags signaling stop. Please open your eyes. Look beneath good looks and charm. You call that person your soulmate? See that they're bad before it's too late. The first time they showed signs, I wish you left and didn't look back. You can't walk back into the trap. You're like a person trying to let the bears in. Why are you walking to the bears den? I'm not sure you'll live happily ever after like Goldilocks did. Please use those ears, not your heart. Listen. Roses and I'm sorry's won't save you, and this relationship doesn't need a savior. I know people make mistakes, but it's a warning. Don't think it's fate. They seem good when it's not one of their bad days. You know it's bad, but you let love trick you. But the joke's on you. It's not love, my love. It's abuse. I know you might miss them, but love from a distance if you must. They aren't somebody you can trust. Leave them in your past and walk past. Leave your past so you can have a future. I beg, my love. Open your eyes, look beneath that devil in a disguise. Halloween isn't every day, so don't let that costume continue to fool you. Love has never hurt, so don't try and adjust the rules. Again, my love. It's not love, it's abuse. Please look through what they are showing you, unfold the lies they feed you, see the truth that your love is nothing. All it is abuse. Hi, my name is Lemonade Dream, and my name on Instagram and all social platforms is lemonade_dream.
I work at a elementary school, so it goes up to 5th grade. So I even see it in like some, negative traits in like the boys at this age. Like if a girl say something to her, you feel like he could go and snatch her bag or, push her. Like there's even stuff like that is alarming because they are so young. We have like 10 years old in like 5th grade.
Yeah.
5th grade.
Yeah, 10.
Okay,
10.
yeah. Even from then, it's because that's what they're saying. They think that that's the way. Oh, like earlier we was talking about how certain myths show up in childhood. So like you feeling like if a boy likes you, he's gonna hit you. Like if he's picking on you, doing extra stuff. And I think that's that's not a good way to think about
It
things.
is a dangerous narrative, right? We say that to girls a lot,
Yeah.
right? Oh, he's being
likes
mean
you.
to you. He must like you, right? Like that's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay for him to be mean to you because that's a nice thing, right? And girls really do believe that. Like I think like relationships, that tends to be what they accept, and then they get into these toxic
Then
things
it turns to adult
early.
relationships.
Yeah.
Of feeling like, he's jealous like this because he loves me. Or he's calling me all these times because he loves me. So it's like that same idea, but like in adult form. It shows up in a lot of ways. Jealousy, overreacting, thinking it's cute if he's doing too much. It all begins with your perspective and how you see it. And as a child, we see it as that way. And I think a lot of people carrying that on into adulthood, thinking the same things. If they didn't love you, he wouldn't care about where you was. He wouldn't call you 10 times. He wouldn't ask you to check in with him 10 times a day. But because he loved you,
And that's what love looks like. Yes. I think that's the thing. It's like love, we have this narrative of what love looks like. And it's actually really toxic.
Right. We don't have the right ideas of what it should look like. We just know what has been normalized.
Women tend to attach themselves, even at a young age, girls do, right, to their identity, and their validation is through their relationships with men. And so if I have a relationship with a guy, it means that I'm valued. And so it's okay if he's like controlling, and it's okay if he hits me sometimes because I have a boyfriend or I have someone in my life, and that's all that I need to feel valued, versus who I am is valuable in itself, right, and worthy of something good, not something toxic. Right. But those narratives are dangerous. Those myths, right? Like,
or even not receiving that love. So if this person is doing all of these bad things to you, but at least you feel like they love you, or what your idea of love is. So you feel like, I'm going to hold on to this because I never received this love. To them, love could be materialistic things. So, he's taking care of me, or he's taking me shopping, things that their parents may have never did in the way that they wanted. They feel like that's love. So they're going to deal with the disrespect, the physical abuse, because at least they have what they consider love. That's another thing.
And that's definitely ACEs connected,
Yeah.
right? And those traumas of experiencing and being in dynamics where your parents are abused, or that you're in homes with domestic abuse, or feeling it yourself. So it's a huge cycle.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
Yes.
But you talked about like talking about emotions, right? In one piece of validation. What are some other things that you in your work have seen have helped to break that cycle a little bit more?
Therapy. You know, not in terms of children, but in terms of adults. Because some adults don't even know that witnessing their parents' abuse or being abused, how it really affected them. A lot of people don't even realize until they start going to therapy. I've seen therapy help people process it, recognize that, this affected you in a very bad way, and also help them to process it. Everybody has their own healing journey. It's like no one way. I've just seen, different things help different people. I even know people that go on their own spiritual journeys. They let go of their vices and things like that. But I can't even speak on one way of, it's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I think you're right, right? Everybody has their own healing journey, but having tools to at least know that they're out there to get through it is really powerful, right? So I love that that idea of a spiritual journey and therapy. Yeah. Therapy is so important. Yeah. A friend had given me this book called Children of Emotionally Immature. I think that's what it's called. I'm not quoting it exactly. I have the wrong title, but it's something about the idea of children of emotionally immature parents. And he actually, it was crazy. We were sitting at the dinner table one day, and my son's friends came over, and it was like a bunch of 20-year-old boys, and they're looking at this book, and they're able to identify. Like the kid was sitting there, my son's friend, and he was like, "Oh my God, that's what my parents do. Like that's what they did, and that's why I feel the way I do." Right? Like, and my son has been able to identify things that he noticed that have been happening in patterns in his life. Right? So like, therapy and language are definitely powerful things for people to be able to move through some of those traumas.
Yeah. And even counseling, like as a couple, I think when you start to realize it, because some people still don't by that point, but even as an adult couple, you realize how you're being toxic to each other. Things that you've been thinking have been normal. Really sitting down with a counselor helping you guys realize how you're both wrong. You love each other, but you're both wrong in some ways. I think I've seen that as well a lot. So I want to move on to accountability. Accountability in adults who have endured childhood trauma and them taking responsibility for who they are now. I feel like a lot of adults don't reach a point of accountability. They feel like this is what happened to me, this is the way I am, take it or leave it. A lot of people are at that place of take me or leave me, this is how I am, but not really understanding the damage that they're doing to the people around them. And that's
or caring.
Yeah.
Like I don't think they care, right? They're just focused on themselves.
Right. Like they're so damaged that they don't even, some people get real cold and heartless after they've been, violated, abused, and traumatized. They turn up to be cold and heartless, and so they will never be accountable for how they're treating people. They just know that this is how I feel. I went through this, and I'm this way because of that. So, yes, I'm going to be, cold and mean towards you because I don't want to be hurt or, So it's like a way of overcompensating as well.
But then they're justifying their actions to harm others because of their own harm. And right, that idea, hurt people. But do they have to? Like, I always struggle with that because I think, like, I've seen people in my life. So my podcast is called Pain to Power, right? And you were on it, right. Pain to Power, Leading with Love. But I've seen people who have taken pain, real pain in their lives, and found ways to empower themselves and help others heal. And then I've seen and witnessed and experienced individuals in my life who have taken their pain and used it as an excuse without accountability to harm others and not take any ownership for that harm. So at what point do adults, because I struggle with this, like what point do adults make that decision that I'm not going to live and allow my trauma or my harm from my own experiences to be the story of who I am? I see you and I'm like, God, you've been through so much and you chose healing.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. You know, it took me a while to get here. You know, I was attacked in 2015, and I think up until 2019, when I got pregnant, that's when things changed for me. You know, but before that, I was in a place of just feeling weak, vulnerable. You know, feeling a lot of, I wouldn't even say hatred. Just I was feeling, you know, not good. I was just feeling not good. Like I wasn't happy. I didn't want to go above and beyond to make people seem like, you know, you can sit beside me. You know, I wasn't pleasant to be around. I isolated myself. I was like doing all of those things because I was at a place of just hurt. But it definitely took a long way to want to. I think I had the victimized mindset that I was stuck in. I had that victimized mindset. For me, my mindset was I had been victimized and I'm hurt and I want to sit in this pain because the pain is so overwhelming. That was my mindset. But as I started having a mental elevation, you know, I wanted to see myself differently. I started to see myself differently, and that's how it started. I started to see myself as a survivor, not just what happened to me. Like I didn't want to just keep having this same story of this is what happened to me. This is why I'm, you know, so depressed and all this stuff. Now, I moved away from that and saying because all of these things have happened, I have grown in these ways. You know, I want to help people. I want to help people see the situations that they're in. I wanted to help people work through, heal through the trauma after being abused. Like I just started to see things differently. I started to have this survivor mentality, survivorship. Like it was a whole process. Like I'm not what happened to me. I am still me and I can be better because of it. I can still choose to grow and elevate and heal. But a lot of people are stuck with that victimized mindset. And it was, you know, it wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't easy.
So what helped you get through it, though?
The victimized mindset?
Yeah, move through that into, like you said, the elevation of your mind.
I just think, I don't know, I feel like my baby is a miracle baby. Like I don't really know what changed or how it changed. But when I got pregnant, my mindset went into, you know, I'm bringing this baby into this world. Everything that I feel, he feels, he deserves to have a happy womb. Like I had this lady, I spoke on it before, but this lady named Pinda. I was at this retreat called Then the Sun Rose, and I was like 4 months pregnant at the time, so I wasn't showing, but I had told her about it. And she was like, your baby deserves a happy womb. Like he deserves to have a happy womb because all of the stress that you're feeling, he's feeling. And if that doesn't change, he's going to come out, you know, feeling all of that baggage and pain and distress that I was feeling. So that was a pivotal moment for me. And I could just say God, like, that's the only way that I can explain it is God. Because I was really at my lowest. Like, I was really at my lowest. I didn't see a way out. Like, I didn't see a better life. I was really stuck thinking that, and I was getting even more depressed by thinking that if I'm going to be feeling all of this pain all the time, like I don't want to keep feeling these ways. I was just like depressed that because I was depressed.
Yeah.
And so I was like further, but yeah, all I can say is God, like something just changed when I got pregnant with him. And ever since then, I've been on my spiritual journey. See, before it wasn't spiritual. You know, it was me just trying to cope, you know, using like drugs, other vices to just feel something. Like I felt very numb to a lot of things. Like my my family can attest to this. Like sometimes I would like go outside in the freezing winter without a coat on and just sit on the porch. Just like sit there to feel something other than all of the pain that I was feeling. Like I just wanted to feel something that was not the constant, pain, depression, frustration. Like I would really sit out there in freezing cold weather, no coats on, nothing. Just, I felt a lot of bad things. I even felt trapped because, I wasn't as mobile as I am now. Like I wasn't able to walk as much. I still needed like help going up and down the steps. So it was a lot. It was some dark times. And then something just changed and I started to want to go on a spiritual journey. Yeah.
But I think everything you just elevated, one, is a beautiful story of power.
Thank you.
And finding your power in that pain. When we talk about accountability with adults, right, I think the one thing that's really hard is that nobody can be accountable for someone else. Like they have to come to it themselves. They have to have that realization, whether it's, a pregnancy that gets you to that realization, or it's some life moment or some moment where you have a conversation, you finally have an aha. But that accountability piece can only be the person taking accountability for themselves when they realize they need to. That's a hard thing.
Yeah.
When you're in relationships with people who have those issues, right? Like, it's really hard, but you have to allow them to come to their own understanding to grow.
And sometimes they never will.
And accept that sometimes they never will. Yeah.
It's not your burden to carry. For me, I was real big on feeling like, how can I forgive this person? And I think I moved away from that. And I told myself that I don't have to forgive this person to move on, because I think that was like instilled in my head by like Christianity and family. From like, the only way that you can move on is if you forgive this person. And I think I was struggling with that. I was trying to do that because I wanted so bad to move on, but it wasn't genuine. Like I truly didn't forgive this person. People try to say, oh, he did this because of his own demons. Well, yeah, but he did this, and because of that, I have like a permanent disability that I'm dealing with, permanent mental stuff, like permanent changes, physical, mental, otherwise. So it's like I didn't have any remorse, so I moved to a space. I feel like I don't have to forgive this person to move on. They did what they did, and it wasn't because of me. So that was a big piece of me moving on as well. I had a lot of guilt at first, people victim blaming. Mm-hmm. Why did you stay? And so I was struggling with all of those things of shame and guilt and the why did you stay type of mentality. So I switched from that, feeling like it wasn't because I stayed that this happened. It's because of who he is. So that was a big piece for me moving on and changing my, mentality. Feeling like, no, he did this because he wanted to do it. It wasn't because I'm weak. It's not because I'm stupid. It's not because of any of these things that people try to make it seem. It's definitely not because I stayed, because when I left, this is when he kidnapped me and tried to take my life. So whether I stayed or left, he still tried to do. So it's like
he was always going to be him.
I was letting people get into my head, and I had to remove people from my head. So it happened the way it happened because it's what he wanted to do to me. He wanted to try to take my life, and it's not because of anything that I did to him. Yeah. So that was a big part for me.
But that's huge. Like, I think what you're elevating is the idea of guilt. And I wonder, for so many people, taking accountability is you have to sit in that space of accepting that your guilt is not yours. Like, whatever you experienced, even people who are abusers, right, like, or doing that to others, they've come from something. And you have to move through that feeling of guilt and let go of the anger and let go of that mindset that, like, this is where you're fixed and this is the only story, right? But all those pieces, like you've said, right, are really, really hard. This is not easy work. And it's not one time, it's not one moment, it's constant relearning and unlearning and reframing all of your thinking. There are just some people who are not willing to face themselves.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because they don't realize what impact they have on the other people in their lives. So it's just a matter of us being careful about recognizing those people in our lives. And unfortunately, I think for some of us, we have to go through the trauma of meeting them
Right.
to know never to do it again, right? Like I imagine for you, you're very aware of who you put into your life now.
Yes. Heavy work, but it's necessary work.
It is. It's necessary. And I mean, you're doing it with so many people right now. Like that is tremendous. That's a huge impact you make to do this work and to help others to process their own pain to get to those places of power. Like I'm in awe of you, Shaharia, and the work that you do and the impact that you make.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm always humbled and honored, to be able to use my story, my truth. It's really just my truth to help other people. It's like nothing was in vain. No. Nothing was in vain. It's all to help the greater cause. I'm just grateful to be a person that can do it.
And I remember when we had our interview, that was what you said. It's like I have a purpose.
Yeah.
That was your driver, right? That you have a purpose. You experience what you experience for a reason, and you're living that reason. I mean, just look at this weekend of surviving through the arts and the beauty of the voices you've brought into the space and the stories that people are openly sharing. It's huge. It's huge. And I think it's part of some of this healing that you're trying to get to, right? Is just talking about it in itself, talking about the impacts, the nuances, the complexities of it is where we get to a better place collectively.
Right. Like I feel like every time I have an interview or speak on it or anything like that, I learn more about myself. So that's why sometimes I can't answer a question immediately. I really dig deep and go inside and like,
does it free you a little bit every time you talk about it more? Does it kind of come out of you a little bit to free?
I think it does. But I do think I probably get to a point where I won't want to speak on it anymore. Only because for so long I would speak on it so much. Yeah. Now I'm at a place of doing the work, doing the healing, and I'm not wanting to, talk about me as much because I know what happened. I'm just at that process, processing everything. But I do feel like later down the line, I can speak about it from a different place. It's like right now I'm still going through it. So and I also see that as well. But every interview, when I talk about it, I'm in a different mind frame when I talk about it. Like when I was first talking about it, when I first started to have speaking engagements, I would cry a lot. Now I process and I reflect a lot. I'll probably get to a point where I can speak about it and be like, boom, boom, boom. This is what helped me. This is what I learned. So I'm still healing and processing as I'm expressing it, talking to people. So I was like, I'm still going through my own thing as I'm helping people with what I learned already about myself, what I know so far. I can only speak to what I know so far because every time you talk about it, it's going to be a different perspective. I'm going to have grown some more. So I'm not going to use the same words or have the same, I'll probably even learn even more about myself and how to verbalize certain things that I was feeling and what helped me. So, yeah, I'm enjoying this process. It's a journey.
So it's interesting because I used to always say that, right, healing is a journey, but I've started to say healing is evolution. Because what you just described, right, it's evolution because every step is like a new you, a new understanding of the world around you, a new way to process it all, right? Like, so we're evolving through the healing process. And I just think the power of that is beautiful because, like in a year when you do this again, you're going to be in a different mindset. You're going to be in a different place and approach it entirely from another viewpoint. And there'll be more power in that, even in that way, right?
Yeah. Evolution.
Yeah, I liked that word. I was
what
like,
it
it's
is.
an evolution.
That's definitely what
Yeah, it is, right? Like, because it's like new steps. And look, and look, we have a lot of setbacks in that evolution. Like, I have recently had a lot of setbacks in my healing revolution, right? But you got the tools to pull off, and each time you bounce back faster.
Right. I agree. Okay, so I guess to end this conversation, I want to touch on. So we were talking about childhood trauma. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So what would be some takeaways for people who have witnessed childhood trauma? People who really want to be accountable. What would you suggest? Like, how can they support themselves or support their siblings? Like, if they're watching this, how can you show up for yourself? How can you show up for the people that may have been right beside you as you were experiencing it, siblings or uncles or, grandparents, because even, everybody's affected when that stuff is going on. What would you say to people?
I mean, I'll say I'm not an expert and I don't have answers, but I think it comes down to what you said, which is that the power of knowing ourselves. And when you stop in whatever circumstance you're in and you recognize and understand who you are, what you need, and what is giving you peace and what is creating chaos for you in your heart and your soul, you start to identify the things and the people that are impacting that. And I think sometimes it's as simple and small as that as a starting point. And then it's deeper, right? There's therapy and there's learning about it and expressing it. I think for young people, the power of learning ideas and concepts, like this idea of like emotional abuse or, and the wild thing is just like one last story is that like literally a year ago, it was just about a year ago, I was sitting with my boys in my bedroom having a conversation with them, and all three of them were telling me how emotional and mental abuse is not a real thing. And now a year later, I have two of my children talking to me openly about their own understanding of the emotional and mental abuse that they are undoing and unlearning right now. So the power of language and understanding ourselves is like a starting point. It's not the only point. It's not the only way. But I think that to me, that's a beginning place. And I've witnessed it with my own children. I have a mantra I say, which is knowing who you are is how you take your power back.
I definitely agree with that. I could definitely agree with everything you just said about so people who have experienced childhood trauma to develop a deeper understanding of who you are, why you are the way that you are, and how you can show up for yourself and others and start to make a change and break that cycle. So, on that note, I want to thank everybody for being here, watching this with us today. I want to thank you, Maria, for having this conversation with me today and giving your truths about your old relationship and also how your children have experienced it themselves, how you've seen them grow and also develop their awareness. I want to thank everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Silent Skills podcast. This topic was on childhood trauma, and we will see you next time.